Greetings to you in the name of Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. Thank you for joining. Yesterday we saw the first part of the book, Jesus, Myth or Messiah. And in that we looked into the historicity of Jesus. The first quest, the second quest, the third quest, and how third quest Jesus was located in his Jewish setting and the Roman Judea as a Messiah according to the Old Testament and in the line of John the Baptist and followed by the primitive church and Paul, and how there are the disciples of these apostles in the 2nd century, and how the chain of transmission of the teachings is intact, and how even the New Testament can be reconstructed from writings of the 2nd century disciples of the apostles. So that was the first chapter. Now we are going to the second chapter. It's called the Gospels Are Not Myths. The first point is that miracles do not imply mythology. So many of the secular scholars and pundits criticized the Gospels because they thought miracles implied mythology. According to Greenleaf, miracles say the objectors are impossible, and therefore the evangelists are either deceivers or deceived. So that is where they start. All the secular scholars, all start with the assumption that non-natural explanations are not allowed a priori, and miracles are therefore impossible. They cannot invoke those explanations in academic writings and projects. And in either case, whether the writers of the gospel were deceived or deceivers, the narrative against the possibility of miracles was founded on the broad and bold assumption that all things are governed by the immutable laws or fixed modes of motion and relation, termed the laws of nature, by which God himself is of necessity bound. But this erroneous assumption is the tortoise on which stands the elephant, which upholds a system of atheism. What is the erroneous assumption? That all things are governed by immutable laws or fixed modes of motion and relation, called the laws of nature, and that even God cannot do anything about them. And this forms the basis for atheism and the rejection of the miraculous, because even God cannot break the laws of nature. But this explanation fails to inform us who made these immutable laws in the first place, nor whence they derive their binding force and irresistible operations, their properties and qualities and attributes of these natural laws. What is the source of that? The argument supposes that the creator of all things first made a code of laws and then put it out of his own power to change them. The scheme of Mr. Hume, that is David Hume, is but another form of the same error. He deduces the existence of such immutable laws from the uniform course of human experience. This, he affirms, is our only guide in reasoning concerning matters of fact. And whatever is contrary to human experience he pronounces is incredible. So without stopping to examine the correctness of this doctrine as a fundamental principle of the laws of evidence on which atheism, the rejection of non-supernatural explanations are based, sufficient in this place to remark that it contains this fallacy. It excludes all knowledge derived by inference or deduction from facts, because it confines us to what we derive from experience alone, and thus depriving us of any knowledge or even rational belief of the existence or character of God. Because by definition God is omnipotent, and he can, who made the laws of nature, also use other laws to stop them, control them, bring about another state of affairs which does not seem to us natural. Now it goes to prove that successive generations of men can make no advancement in knowledge, but each must begin de novo and be limited to the results of his own experience. If only experience is the basis on which one wants to argue the nature of things. But if we may infer from what we see and know that there is a supreme being by whom this world was created, we may certainly at equal reason believe him capable of works which we have never yet known him to perform. God can do things which we have never yet known him to. He can do a new thing. We may fairly conclude that the power which has originally put forth to create the world is still constantly and without ceasing exerted to sustain it, and that the experienced connection between the cause and effect is but the uniform and constantly active operation of the finger of God. Whether this uniformity of operation extends to things beyond the limits of observation is point we cannot certainly know. Okay, so uniformity of observation is not enough, because God can do things beyond our observation, and there are people who would observe it and who we do not know, and majority of people may not know. Whatever this uniformity of observation extends to things beyond the limit of observation is point we cannot deny, we cannot certainly know. Its existence is in all things, that ordinary consensus may be supposed to be ordained as conducive to our happiness, and if the belief in a revelation of peace and mercy from God is conducive to the happiness of man, it is not irrational to suppose that he would depart from his ordinary course of action in order to give it such a attestation as should tend to secure that belief, that God is doing it for relief of man. Miracles are done by God to help man, to help a group of people, or to show his power and revelations, because he wants to grant the favor to that man or that group of people. A miracle is improbable when we can perceive no sufficient cause in reference to his creatures, why the deity should not vary his mode of operation. It ceases to be so. Impossible. It ceases to be impossible when such cause is assigned. When there is a cause for God to intervene and do miracles, then it ceases to be that miracles are impossible. That means it becomes possible, and there is reason why God will do it, and because he can do it and is concerned enough to do it. So summarizing the argument made by Greenleaf, the passage begins with the objection against miracles, arguing that they are impossible based on the belief that everything is governed by immutable laws of nature, which even God is bound by. But the assumption of immutable laws according to this passage forms the basis of an atheistic system. Questions about the origin and enforcement of these laws are left unanswered in the system. In atheism, they don't go back enough to explain the origin of these laws. When they start, who made these laws, who designed these laws, and how these laws got their properties or powers. Then Greenleaf critiques the notion, exemplified by Hume's philosophy, that the existence of immutable laws can be inferred from a uniform course of human experience, which serves as our only guide in reasoning about facts. Anything contrary to this experience is deemed incredible. A fallacy of this doctrine, according to the author, is that it only allows knowledge derived from direct experience and excludes knowledge derived from inferences or deductions. So that is the critique, and this is how Greenleaf debunks Hume. This limitation, in effect, precludes any knowledge of or rational belief in God. The doctrine is further criticized for implying that knowledge cannot progress across generations. Each generation must begin anew, limited to their own direct experience. But this is not so. The The author counters that if we can infer a supreme being from observation, we should also rationally believe in his capabilities beyond our own experience, that he can bring about states of affairs which can be, from our point of view, seen as miraculous. The author suggests that the powers to create the world is still actively involved in its sustenance. God is involved in sustenance and he cares enough to act on behalf of people he is concerned about, whom he loves and whom he wants to show favor. Okay? Attributing the consistent connection between cause and effect, which is the constant activity of God. While we can't know if this uniform operation extends beyond our observable universe, it can be assumed to be for our happiness. There is reason why God acts and causes miracles. The author suggests that if the revelation from God contributes to human happiness, it's rational to think he might depart from his usual mode of operation to provide miracles, implying justification for miracles. The author concludes that a miracle only seems improbable when there is no perceived reason for God to alter his operational modes. However, once such a reason is provided to alter his operational modes, the improbability of miracle ceases, and we can see that God will have to rationally intervene because there is a reason for that. And he is powerful enough to do that. In conclusion, the passage disputes the view that immutable laws govern the universe and preclude miracles. It critiques this view as limiting knowledge to only direct human experience and argues instead for the possibility of inferring the existence and capabilities of supreme being beyond known experience. In other words, an agent, supernatural agent causing miracles. The author suggests that the uniform operation of cause and effect, assumed to be for human happiness, could also include divine revelation of miracles when such actions contribute to human happiness. Therefore, a miracle's improbability diminishes when the plausible reason for God to vary his actions is identified. Skeptics often have preconceived ideas when it comes to religious belief, particularly the concept of God and miracles. They usually come with the idea that miracles are impossible, even though they haven't proven the impossibility. And the arguments are full of holes and are not rational enough. Similarly, they believe that there is no God even though they haven't proven his non-existence. Their logic leads them from their unproven belief to conclude that miracles don't occur because there is no God to perform them and because nature's laws cannot be broken. But let's think about this. Humans managed to overcome gravity and natural law by using another law, the laws of aerodynamics, principles of aerodynamics. By generating a force that overcomes gravity, we have been able to fly and even reach outer space to move. This was impossible until we discovered and understood these principles. So, isn't it possible that there are other unknown laws or principles that God might be using to perform miracles, to bring about the state of affairs, which we cannot? Or maybe God, as the creator, has the ability to manipulate known natural laws to make miracles happen. There is also a striking naturalness in the characters exhibited in the sacred historians, rarely if ever founding works of fiction and probably nowhere else to be collected in similar manner from fragmented incident allusions, expressions, the writings of different persons. Take, for example, that of Peter, as it may be gathered from the evangelists and it will be hardly possible to conceive that four persons writing at different times could have concurred in the delineation of such a character if it were not real. Character 2, we must observe, which is nowhere explicitly drawn but is shown only here and there, causally in the subordinate parts of the main narrative. Thus, some zealous man, sudden and impulsive, Peter, yet humble and ready to retract, honest and direct in his purpose. Ardent and loving his master is deficient in fortitude and firmness in his cause. When Jesus put any question to the apostles, it was Peter who was foremost to reply as if they would inquire of Jesus. It was Peter who was readiest to speak. He had the impetuous courage to cut off the ear of the high priest servant who came to arrest Jesus, his master, and the weakness to dissemble before the Jews. In the matter of eating with Gentile converts, it was he who ran with John to the sepulchre on the first intelligence of the resurrection of Jesus, and with characteristic zeal rushed in, while John paused without the door. He had the order to desire and the faith to attempt to walk on water at the command of his Lord. But as soon as he saw the wind boisterous, he was afraid. He was the first to propose the election of another apostle in the place of Judas, and it was who courageously defended them all on the day of Pentecost when the multitude charged them with being filled with new wine. He was forced to acknowledge Jesus to be the Messiah. On the contrary, there is apparently the most perfect indifference on their part whether they are believed or not, or rather they are evident conscious they are recording events well known to all in their own country and times and undoubtedly to be believed, like any other matter of public history, by readers in all the countries and ages. It is worthy too of a special observation that though the evangelists record unparalleled suffering and cruel death of their beloved Lord, and this too by hands with the consenting voices of those on whom he had conferred the greatest benefits, and their own persecution and dangers, yet they have bestowed no evidence of harshness or even just censures on the authors of all this wickedness, all those who persecuted them, but have everywhere left the plain and unencumbered narrative to speak for itself, and the reader to pronounce his own sentence of condemnation, like true witnesses who have nothing to gain or lose by the events of the cause. So here, Greenleaf is discussing the nature of the Holy Scriptures. Summarizing this long passage, Simon Greenleaf asserts the realistic and complex nature of characters depicted in the Bible and uses the example of Peter. The author also emphasizes other aspects of evangelist writing, including their straightforwardness, lack of self-promotion, lack of attempts to overemphasize the importance of the events they record, or lack of embellishments. The evangelists do not seek to gain sympathy or approval, but simply provide an objective account of the events, leading the reader to form their own judgments. The evangelists are also willingly present unflattering aspects about themselves, criteria of embarrassment, such as their misunderstanding of Jesus' teachings and their desertion of Jesus during the dangerous times of his trial. Greenleaf believes that this type of honest portrayal is indicative of people writing under a deep sense of accountability to God. He concludes by mentioning that further instances of this kind of proof will be explored in subsequent narratives. Simon Greenleaf nails the lid on the coffin and compels the skeptic to reconsider their bias and investigate the evidence more carefully, to see that the Gospels are indeed true eyewitnesses' testimonies of the life and times of Jesus of Nazareth. Greenleaf, one of the principal founders of the Harvard Law School, originally set out to disprove the biblical testimony concerning the resurrection of Jesus Christ. But he was the one, on further examination of these, careful examination of the internal witness of the gospel, would dispel all the myths of the heart of Christianity. With his legal expertise, this legal scholar concluded that the witnesses of who wrote the Gospels were reliable witnesses, and that the resurrection did in fact happen. You can read it in his work, The Testimony of the Eyewitnesses, written by the founder of Harvard Law School, Simon Greenleaf. And that is a very excellent book. So we come to the passage of second chapter where we have looked into the nature of Gospels, and we are responding to skeptics, showing the hollowness of their analysis and the reasonableness of the Christian position based on miracles, based on the characters in the Gospels, based on the nature of the recorded events. As Greenleaf, the legal scholar and the master of evidential thinking, has argued in his book, Testimony of the Evangelists. This Simon Greenleaf is a legal scholar, and through his expertise has shown us how the gospel eyewitnesses are reliable